that idea of if I make a mistake, I am a mistake, it's very personal. And so it blocks us from seeing things differently and learning different things and being like, oh, the way I've been conditioned to be in this world is hurting other people. God, I mean, that's even where that's like a compounded thing. So being open to receiving that information is really, really challenging for most of us, understandably. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of intention to be able to show up and sit in that space that allows us to evolve.
Hello and welcome to the Fresh Perspectives podcast, where our intention is growing together and leading with love. I'm Peter Callahan, and I believe we each have an incredible capacity to continue to learn and evolve as individuals and as a species, and bring way more love and a lot less fear into the world and our daily lives. Changing can be hard. And I've found that even if nothing changes, having the courage to see our challenges from a fresh perspective can change everything. I'm glad you're here. So today's guest, as you just heard a bit from, is Valerie Friedlander. Valerie is a life business alignment coach for high-achieving, multi-passionate moms. She is an International Coach Federation, so the ICF, PCC, just like me, a professional certified coach, as well as an energy leadership master practitioner. She's got 10 years of corporate management experience, meditation training, and over 20 years of supporting people in science and spiritually based personal development. Her philosophy is rooted in individual empowerment with social system awareness. And Val is also the host of the Unlimited podcast, as well as a wife, mom of two, a sci-fi and fantasy nerd, and a self-described creative spirit. And Val has a wealth of knowledge from all of that experience that I just listed, and part of this clip that I just played at the top is part of the very first 8 minutes of this podcast, where Valerie completely blew my mind. So I was speechless for a few moments. So excited to share that with you. And we talked about, really, as you heard a little bit, the ways we can be unknowingly hurting each other and the difference between intent versus impact. We talk about how helpful allowing space for discomfort can be. That's really part of the title today. And how overcoming our conditioning to play small and over-individualize can lead to so much more life experience. And a big part of that is seeking out community care, which you'll hear Val talk more about, and what can hold us back from finding community, how to work with people-pleasing tendencies, and the many other societal and individual challenges that can get in our way of really finding and creating community in our lives, and how we can step into being with our discomfort to increase our capacity for feeling more connected to each other and to ourselves. So thanks for joining us for this conversation with Valerie Friedlander. Keep it here. Well, thank you so much for being here, Val.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an honor. It's an honor and a pleasure. And I know you've got your own podcast, so I'm happy to initiate by plugging that. What's the name again?
It's called Unlimited. And most of the time, I didn't really think too far ahead about like the names because it was available on the platform that I was using. But you do usually have to put my name in too to find it.
Unlimited. Awesome.
Yeah, but it's really about taking off the limitations, the learned limitations we all have living in the world that we don't function, we don't exist outside of a societal context.
Yes.
So it's taking those learned limitations off and tapping into unlimited possibilities. And then being able to choose with intention our own limitations, our own spaces, like what we would call boundaries, so that we can function. Because we aren't meant to be completely unlimited, but we often limit ourselves and our creativity, and then we don't play the way we could as our full selves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unlimited. It's great. That's great. It makes me think of Brene Brown's armor analogy that she's always come back to.
Yeah, it's so funny because I often evoke a Brene Brown vibe, I guess.
Yeah.
And I've listened to, I think, like, a TED Talk or, like, a few things, but I've not read any of her books, and I've not,
Wow.
like, really consumed, like, I haven't listened to her podcast or anything like that, so I just think it's really funny. I'm like, "Well, just so you know, I'm not stealing her stuff."
Understood.
I haven't actually consumed it. But, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I'll often do is I want to listen, I want to learn from people who are coming from a different lived experience from me, who are coming from a different, yeah, space so that I'm expanding myself versus, there are amazing people who have very similar lived experience to me. Um, and while they're awesome and they have a lot of insights, they often resonate with what I'm already bringing, what I'm already showing up with. And so while I may be like doing the head nod thing with them, and I love that, it's still more limited. I wanna make sure that I'm expanding the way my perception is and what I understand about the world, because there are so many people who have very different experiences in the world than me. So, learning from those people is really important to me.
Absolutely. Beautiful. That's a great plug. I've been listening, chipping away at your 80 plus episodes, whatever it is now. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just that, and it's the overused term by far, is diversity, right? We talk about it
Mhm.
all the time. My head still goes right to Anchorman for those who, if it's an old wooden ship, but
Yeah.
but just there is so much underneath there. I'm always fascinated with the paradox too. In some ways, we're all very different, as the way you're speaking to, the more identities we share, the more experiences we share, the more similarities there are, and it's comfortable. To me, so much of this
Mhm.
work that I know you and I both believe in deeply is expanding our awareness, our understanding of others' experiences. And the way I phrase it for myself is trying to do the least harm possible in the world. I want to
Mhm.
keep reducing the amount of harm that I'm doing to myself and others, and increasing the impact that I'm having on
Yeah.
others and hopefully the world in whatever small ways. And it's easier to stay comfortable than it is to welcome or move toward discomfort and hear things and try and wrap our heads around experiences that we have much less to relate to. And yet my experience has been, we're all still human beings. That's why I use that term so much. We're all humans. And it's amazing to me how much relatability we can find, especially if we go a little bit deeper underneath these different identities and life experiences. And so I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's value in
Well, I mean,
both.
that's how as I dig, it becomes more and more apparent to me that the things where I struggle and the things that cause harm to me are rooted in harm that's being done to other people. And, people who have less access to the societal privileges that I have. And while I also participate in that, and those places of participation in that also do me harm, I come from a sociology background, so that's a lot of where my interest tends to lie. I love looking at people patterns and understanding how just the dynamics, because our brains love patterns. So we love to have that understanding. It makes it easier when we can go, oh, this means this, like connect those dots. It facilitates, but it also creates a lot of unconscious limitations, because where we don't have knowledge, our brain, fills in the gaps with what it already knows, which isn't always accurate. And so we make assumptions that create limits for us, but then also limit our capacity to show up for other people who have different experiences. So recognizing that we grew up in a space where it's not okay to be imperfect. Perfectionism runs rampant. It's that fixed mindset, which is basically that binary. You're either good or you're bad. You're either right or you're wrong. And when we have any places, I notice, where we have that binary, it's like this or this, and if you imagine your hands being out and then going up to the sides of your head, it's this or this. It's basically creating blinders to what options you have and what possibilities exist. So it's creating natural limits that exist in our subconscious brain. So I always kind of question when we have those binaries, and yet what they're doing is protecting us because and creating a sense that there's danger. And when we have that feeling that there's danger, oh, I could be wrong. I could pick the wrong thing. I could that feels
Right.
dangerous. And so we shut down other ways of thinking, other ways of being, other possibilities, including that we could be different, that maybe the way we're doing things isn't the way we really want to be doing things, is causing harm. And that feels like a actual danger in our body, and our nervous system gets really tense and stressed out that like, oh, I could be wrong. That idea of if I make a mistake, I am a mistake. It's very personal. And so it blocks us from seeing things differently and learning different things and being like, oh, the way I've been conditioned to be in this world is hurting other people. God, I mean, that's even where that's like a compounded thing. So being open to receiving that information is really, really challenging for most of us, understandably. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of intention to be able to show up and sit in that space that allows us to evolve.
Absolutely. Wow. So much in there, Val. Thank you. Yes.
No.
I just have to edit myself out for a minute here because I'm just kind of blown away with how much, wisdom you just dropped in the first 8 minutes for us. Thank you. A few different I mean, you definitely
Yeah.
evoked Brene Brown unknowingly a couple times there. First of all, I think her very first book, The Gifts of Imperfection. I
Yeah.
love that book. And maybe we can come back to, I think, in a little bit, imposter syndrome and this term you used earlier that I've never even heard, comparisonitis. It's a nice, but I get it. And boundaries will fit in there too. But I really, really resonate with this, like you said, really challenging acknowledgement that the way I've been conditioned is harming people. I mean, that has been a really tough part of my own growth and working on this growth mindset and opening up to the realities and the complexities of the world and acknowledging how little I actually understand and maybe even have the capacity to, but how true that feels to me that I've now created enough psychological safety with some people, right? Built enough trust and learned some communication skills that people have felt comfortable letting me know when I'm harming them. I've had someone in the office came to me and said, Pete, when you walk around and check in on people, like I know you're a coach and I know you like this kind of stuff, but when you're asked, I identify as fat, she said. And when you're asking people like, hey, have you drank any water recently? How's your body feeling? Have you gotten up and moved? Like, I don't believe your intention is bad, but I'm still perceiving that as, oh, he's saying these things to me because I'm fat. And this is this is just part of her experience. And I immediately just, oops, she said, ouch. I said, oops, I love this tool, ouch and oops. And I'm so sorry that that's your experience. And please help me understand more. And then eventually, I'm more than willing to do my best to correct my behavior. It is part of this conditioning that I have, for better or worse. And I will continue to be open to you letting me know, ouch, hey, can you please not bring that up? Gratefully, I didn't wind up doing it, I don't think, again. But anyway, it's so possible. There's so many other examples that come to mind. And I'm grateful to have gotten feedback for some of them. And I know I'm not for 1,000 other ones, right? These aggressions, some people call them microaggressions. I like the
Yeah.
word
The
aggressions, right?
microaggression.
We're doing it all the
Yeah.
time. And I love the term about, I want to do the least harm possible because I can't do no harm. It is not in my full control to avoid doing all harm.
None of us, we can't exist in this society without doing harm because we live in a space that's pushing us to be counter to our
Right.
natures. And so it's about evolving it to a place where it can be that, but while recognizing that it's not that yet. And a lot of it has to do with healing and unlearning, and that all of our healing and unlearning is tied together. And I think knowing that has been really helpful for me to lean into it, that it's like, it's not about shame and blame and guilt. It's about working together. It's about growing together. And so, even just thinking about it differently is really helpful. And it's interesting because in our coaching space, one of the things that I really appreciated in our training was someone said that what you say is about you and what I hear is about me. And what I say is about me and what you hear is about you. We're all processing through our own
Yeah.
filters and it's our personal experience. So being able to own those buttons gives us power over those buttons. At the same time, that's that like individual aspect of it. And so I think that piece is really important. And it's important to recognize again that we don't live We don't exist. Our who we are is very tied to the societal constructs that we live in. So to recognize that someone's button may be very well tied to dynamics that are present because of the power dynamics in our society that I am a part of, that we are all a part of. So to just like what you described, I think that's such a powerful example because to be able to recognize that my intention may not match my impact. And I've heard so many Black and BIPOC creators talk about that experience of, well, you might have intended to be really supportive, but the way that I'm receiving is harmful. And to be able to go, okay, so how do I recalibrate so that my impact is matching my intention rather than taking it as a personal assault, like, oh, you're hurting me, you don't understand me, and taking that personally, they're threatening me to be able to say, like, oh, I'm really sorry that I had that impact, to own my impact, and then to be able to say, all right, how do I show up differently? I want to be supportive. My intention is to be supportive and caring. How do I do that? What would that look like for you? For me to be supportive and caring, what do you need to receive that? And even starting to just ask that instead of assuming that. I had a whole thing with my husband where when I was initially learning coaching, I was like, I'm going to use these tools everywhere. They're so much more powerful than like giving my opinion. And he was like, I'm your husband. I just want your opinion. But then we've had some things where like I ask a question. He's like, I don't want you to ask me any questions. I'm like, normal. He's like, don't coach me. I said, normal people ask questions too. It's not just a coaching thing. It's about being curious.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So they're all kinds of things.
Exactly. Yeah, intent versus impact. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And what you're describing, I think one of our themes today is going to be discomfort, right? It is uncomfortable. So much of what we're talking about, it's uncomfortable to acknowledge. It's then uncomfortable to own to any degree and take responsibility because it can be easy to feel like I didn't mean to, right? And it's true. Like it was not. I just love this idea of assuming positive intent, like generosity of interpretation, right? We're all doing our best to be happy and to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other and live fulfilling, meaningful lives to different degrees of success. And big part of what drives me in this coaching world is how can I help create a little bit more awareness and intentionality of that for others, and serendipitously it happens for me as well. You know, we're all each other's students and teachers, so it's always happening for me at the same time. And yeah, I'm so grateful that you're doing so much of this work, and especially listening to, again, like all these diverse backgrounds and on trying to understand all these different experiences. Though I'm not going to say the last Brene Brown tool, maybe there'll be others that come up, but you really spoke well to one that she uses a lot. You were talking about earlier, the gap between perception and reality. And again, just the courage it takes to own, I don't know. It's such a powerful tool. The tool that she often brings up is the story that I'm telling myself is, right? The story.
Yeah. And that speaks to that assumptions, like how do we bring those assumptions, those places where we're filling in the gaps with our own experience? How do we engage those and think beyond that to like what else could be possible, but even just like if it's safe to ask and to assess what could I do to find out more information. And I know that one of the things she talks about, because it's come up a lot of times, is vulnerability. I think she's got a book now on that. Like it does take being vulnerable, and it does take allowing the space for the discomfort. And we live in such a fast-paced society that even pausing can feel uncomfortable. Just giving that space to, okay, I feel uncomfortable. I'm just going to like avoid it, right? I just want to get around it. And there's so much that allows us to do that. So we don't have to sit with our feelings. We don't have to sit with uncomfortable emotions. And I mean, I grew up in a home impacted by alcoholism. And when my dad got sober, emotions were very scary. They were not, because there was learning how to even have them and express them in a healthy way. And so it was a lot. I mean, there was no like direct violence, but the emotional charge was kind of explosive. And so to be able to take in that, like the way I processed that was, wow, like avoiding emotions is really dangerous because they don't go anywhere. They just get stuffed inside. We have to be able to deal with them. We need the tools to learn from them and to give them space, because if we don't, this is what happens. is that then they're so much bigger. And I mean, I have children, and you have children, like their emotions are big. And so to be able to, I was watching one of the creators I really enjoy as a parent is Mr. Chaz, and he did a little video talking about the superhero journey. And big emotions are like a superpower. It's an indication that they feel deeply, and it's a superpower. And any superhero needs support on their journey. They need a mentor and they need space to practice that superpower. And so, how can you show up to be that mentor? Well, you can't really be a mentor if you don't engage like, if you haven't learned some of that yourself, right? So, to be able to give space to sit with a feeling and allow yourself to process what is going on, what is coming up, what triggered this, what don't I know, what information do I need? Getting curious about what's happening internally, and then being able to show up to that. But I had a client recently also bring up, it's hard to take space to pause. I need to pause on this. I need to come back to this or whatever. Pausing requires taking space, and taking space means that we are taking up space. And if you've been conditioned to play small, if you've been told to be smaller, children are meant to be seen and not heard, like any of that kind of messaging of your voice doesn't matter, taking up space is scary, and it requires another level of vulnerability. I have to be vulnerable enough to ask for space, because that's a flag. Oh, something's wrong with me. I can't just do the thing. I have to wait. It must mean that I'm deficient. Like there's so many other layers of messaging that come into play, but it's critical in order to be like, so we have to overcome that. And then we have to engage the processing of the feelings, which are uncomfortable.
Exactly, Val. That's we were just saying before. Like, I shared on an episode recently. I got back from a 7-day silent meditation retreat and got back into a family like Easter gathering and was feeling overwhelmed a few times and just still refused to pause and give myself that for a bunch of different reasons. One, because I didn't want to look weird, and because I didn't want to continue the discomfort. The irony, of course, is that I then experienced a slightly lower maybe amount of discomfort for a much longer period of time. And that's always my experience when I actually remember and have the courage and the honesty with myself, the ability to be real with myself and say, what I need right now is a few minutes. And the cool thing about meditating for a while now is that it doesn't take me that long, usually, to come back to center, to reground myself, to just check in, feel what I'm feeling, understand it. And also, this is the way I spend most of my coaching sessions, to your point about the space that we're trying to create as coaches. My coach and I, she's very somatic, sort of body-based, trauma-informed, really has an incredible background. And we just, especially now after working together for over a year, I just get on and I'm just like, okay, so I'm going to be uncomfortable for the next hour and then I'll try and go on with my life. And it's like, even last week, I was feeling kind of hopeless. I was like, man, there's just so much pain in me. I feel so wounded. And there's so many unknown things that are going on in my body, in my system, and the way I'm relating to the world. It's like, man, I just want all this to be gone and to be healed, and I know that it's valuable to spend that time, right? And we talk all about it on this podcast, and yet it's still really uncomfortable. But I just have so much faith, so much trust that sitting with this discomfort, just witnessing it, trying to be with it, noticing the sensations in my body, doing my best to understand it without needing to have all the answers, will allow me to have more peace, more ease, more courage to meet other moments of discomfort later in my life, later today or next year, whatever it might be. How do you think about these things, Val?
I think that's one of those things that comes up for people is like, why would I do that?
The Matrix is fun. I'm not really.
What's the benefit, right? I always love that analogy too of what are you taking, the red pill, blue pill? I was amused to see that play. I saw the preview for the Barbie movie, which I'm probably more excited
Big
about.
Margot Robbie fan, yeah. We'll see how it is.
And then it's like, which shoe do you want to pick? And she's like, oh, I want to go back to the fantasy world. Thank you very much. And she's like, no, you can't do that. But you have to choose for yourself. And I feel like so often we get to that place where it's so bad that we can't allow ourselves to choose what's comfortable anymore because nothing is comfortable. And I know that was true for me. I got to a place, it was in college, and I saw the pattern. I saw the pattern in my relationships. I'd come out of a really emotionally abusive relationship, was my first like intimate relationship in college. And I was processing that. And I had a similar, not the same, but a similar dynamic with my roommate, just in terms of how I was showing up and what I was demanding essentially. And I accused her of being like my ex. And that was when it hit me. Wait a second. That'll fool me once. Shame on you. Fool me twice. Shame on me. I don't like shame. I think that's a problem too. But, still, that was what came up for me at that time with the space that I was in. And I was like, oh, it's me. And I've been trying so hard and I'm still doing the thing. And, I've been trying so hard. Like I knew watching my parents do their work, I was predisposed to be codependent. And I worked so hard to not be, except I jumped right into that and dug the most codependent little hole I could. And so I crawled into bed and I was like, I'm not getting out of bed. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to function in the world when everything I've done has not worked. And it was shortly thereafter that a friend, she was actually more of a friend of my roommate than of me. And she came into the room and she's like, hey, going to a 12-step meeting. Do you want to come with me? She's like, we were the only two college students going to a meeting for the next year and a half of our college experience. I learned a lot from that relationship of us just growing and learning together. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of having a team and having other people. And of course, doing the learning that I've done, like we can't shift these systemic issues on our own. They say systemic problems require systemic solutions. A lot of what we experience isn't just about us and our own deficiencies. And that I think creates a barrier to asking for help is when we think that it's just, oh, something's wrong with me. I'm broken. And for a long time, I always thought that all of my issues were because something was wrong with me when I became a mom and I had done all the right things. I climbed the corporate ladder. I got married. I bought a house and then I had 2 kids. And I was like, I did all the right things. Why am I miserable? Something must be wrong with me. I must not have fixed something. I must be doing something wrong still. And it was quite a process to get to a point where I was like, oh no, it's just that I don't know how to do the next thing. I wasn't connected enough with myself. I was following all the rules. I like to use the analogy of Captain Marvel because I'm a total nerd. Captain Marvel is a badass doing what she does with all the misinformation that she had. And she's amazing. But she felt like something was off. Something was wrong. She thought it was her. And then she talked to people. She connected with other people and people who were different from her, different, as she thought, different species than her even. And it was through those conversations where she started to reconnect with who she really is. And she started to unlearn everything that she'd been taught about who she is and her place in the world. And made her so much more powerful. I mean, she's one of the most powerful Marvel superheroes. And it was because she removed all of the facade of what she had been indoctrinated with and showed up in her full self with the new things that she'd acquired, the new relationships she'd acquired, the old relationships she reacquired. And that allowed her to be even more badass. And that's kind of what I think of, like, if I were to analogize my own experience, but also the journey that I hope to support people on is essentially that. Unlearning all of that over individualization that it's your deficiencies. And it's really removing those things that we've been blinded with so that we can step into being more human and more connected with each other and ultimately, with ourselves so that we can have those vulnerable and powerful connections.
Absolutely. More human and more connected. Thank you. Yes. And if we do choose to work with you, could we also make it in a just one episode montage so that then all that learning, unlearning, and reparenting could be taken care of, and then we can move on with our happy lives? Is that on offer?
I wish that worked. So I think that's that scarcity often drives us into and the lack of pause. Like it needs to be fast. It's a journey, as I'm sure, you say all the time. It's never like it's one and done. It's a walking through. Some of those intense periods of discomfort, it can feel like, why am I even doing this? This is a lot. Like it just doesn't end. But it becomes easier. And you can't be comfortable with the unknown because it's unknown. There's a natural discomfort that's part of that. There's a natural discomfort with change. And if you can recognize that we need change in the world, then know that that's a part of you because you're part of the world. So we often feel powerless over the big issues that are happening, the big challenges. They're reflected in our own lives. So if you can start to create a different reflection through the way that you're living, even just, connecting with other people in a safe and vulnerable way. And that may be starting with a professional because you know that they're there to be a safe space for you. Starting with a professional and then moving into developing those relationships where you can show up that way so that you can start to reflect something different into the world because it's all connected.
Yes. Being the change we wish to see.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And whether it's,
Yeah.
professional, a third party, preferably not someone who's too invested in you, right? Because it can cloud we're giving too much advice.
Yeah, the bias
Right.
folks. My son said to me the other day, is like, you're like my therapist. I was like, I am not. That if you yes, you are at an age and definitely life lived experience such that it would be helpful for you to have one. So we'll do that. I have a lot of tools, but I'm way too biased to be that person
That's
for
great.
you.
Yeah,
So let's just acknowledge that right
totally. Totally. And right, like, so a therapist can be, especially with health insurance, super
now. Mhm.
helpful. And, I heard you
Yes.
reference 12 step as well. And I come from two
Mhm.
alcoholic grandfathers, and my mom is now sober. Actually grew up going to Al Anon meetings, my brother and I, with her. My last podcast conversation, or one of the more recent ones, depending on what order I release things in, with Ralph Riccio, he was talking about his journey with sobriety as well. And it just reminds me of whether it's a professional or a community or just a class, right? The 8-week mindfulness based stress reduction course can be life changing. It certainly was for me and really helped me solidify my meditation practice and really feel not alone with the 30 other people sitting around the circle, sharing unbelievable challenges that were both totally different from my experience, while also being on some levels relatable, as we were talking about before. And yeah, acknowledging that there is going to be discomfort. And like you're saying, it does increase our capacity. Like, I really, and while I still, like I was mentioning last week, I felt a little hopeless. Like, I was just having a moment of strong discomfort and really wondering, like, is all this worth it? And yet I've felt better since then. And I continue to have just a really deep faith, just trust in our interconnection and in this process of unconditioning, unlearning that you're speaking to, and reconnecting with ourselves and each other. And I hope, that I keep at least building my resilience, right? If we're not going to become enlightened or fully heal all of our historical and nature nurture wounds that we have.
Not in this generation.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's gonna take took generations to build. It's gonna take generations for us to nibble away at it, and just like Resmaa Menakem talks
I
about,
was
is
just
just nibble at it. Just keep nibbling at it.
Yes. My Grandmother's
Mhm.
Hands is his book, Resmaa Menakem.
Yes.
Highly recommend. But it's making me just curious, what's giving you hope still? As I guess I've had some moments of ebbing and flowing. And what do you find really keeps you going?
One of the things that my dad has inspired in me in particular is being of service. I think being of service to others, while it can be, for me as someone who has struggled with codependency and overgiving, and depleting myself, like I have to be mindful of what I need to, and like creating that space so I'm not exhausting myself. Not so much necessarily breaking boundaries, but also being aware of what is in my container, like how much do I have energetically. But when I can show up, even just to listen to somebody, even just to sit with other people, I was raised in a Quaker community, the Religious Society of Friends, and unprogrammed. And that means like our real service is essentially sitting in waiting silence. So even just sitting with other people, being around other people, lending my energy to a space, showing up, helping, doing a carpooling. I have a friend who needs to have a more space where she can't drive. And so we started picking up the kids. They don't live too far, so we do the driving for school. And that's it's a place where I feel like, I'm connecting with other people. And I heard this and I think it was Gabor Mate, actually, because I'm reading his book right now, The Myth of Normal. And when we think about depression, it's like pressing down, depressing. When you depress something, you push it down. And to reinflate that, one of the tools for like reinflating what has been pressed down or releasing that depression is connection. And so to connect with other people gives me hope. Other people who are doing even whatever layer they are with it, people who are showing up with intention to do good in the world, to grow the world, those people give me a lot of hope.
It's wonderful. Yeah, being of service.
Even just energetically. Service can be lending my energy to another person. I'll reference another person, Trisha Hersey of the NAP ministry. She has a book called Rest is Resistance, and she talks a lot about like just resting together. And there's so much to that. I love that book. It's like listening to a prayer, and it's a very much a call in. And that idea of just the power of napping together, to be able to be vulnerable enough to rest with other people. Like each piece of these things, it's like being in community, being in connection helps me remember I'm not alone in those places where we are most stressed, the places where we're in struggle and we do need to fight for rights, for justice. It can be exhausting and we think, "Oh, well, I need to self-care better." And that's the message that's very individual. "Oh, we need to self-care better." And I'm like, "Look, you're not gonna stop and meditate when a bear is chasing you. I mean, you're just not. Like, you're gonna run from the bear, or you're gonna try and hide. You're not gonna go, hold up, need to meditate." So but sometimes the bear is an illusion, or it's a bear, but it's not like it's not about to attack you. It's the difference between a bear and like a battle. And so to recognize that there needs to be and space given, but those spaces where we feel like we're being chased by a bear, that's where community care is supposed to fit in. That's not where self-care is supposed to fit in. That's where community care is supposed to fit in. We don't have that as a normal piece in our society anymore. That's not something that exists. Typically, we have to start creating it. And so that's why I emphasize connecting with other people, if it's not necessarily being of service in a like, I'm going to go do this and do this and do this. It's like in a way where you're connecting, where you're being with other people. That's part of that community care. That's part of that thing that helps us release all the crud that's depressing us.
Absolutely. Community care. I like that term. Community care. Social support is the more cold term I sometimes hear. And I couldn't agree more. That's what comes up in me. And I find, and I noticed this in a lot of people that I work with and friends, that just we have this deep longing in us for more community care, more time with others, while simultaneously some of this conditioning that you're referencing, this individualistic, toxic positivity, like, let me just take care of myself and my family and all the rest is extra if I can fit it in, versus like, this is a need that I have. And I think one of the biggest challenges that can come up is boundaries, is how do I actually find some degree, I like the word harmony over balance, as those who are listening to more than one episode will hear. How do we find this harmony between the two, and how do we skillfully first connect with ourselves and understand where sort of some amount of healthy boundary might be for how much time and space I'm giving to myself versus others and family members versus the community, and recognize that there's huge benefits to me in doing this too. and the example that comes to mind is neighbors. Like, so few of us know our neighbors really well. And I do a little bit of both. I've gotten to know some and others I kind of avoid. And I recognize there could be a fear in me of, yeah, it could be interesting to talk to this person. It's generally a great idea to know your neighbors, I think, for 1,000 reasons. I actually share a lawnmower with my next door neighbor, so we only have to take care of one instead of both. And yet some people can want even more connection. So many of us are lonely that it's like you talk to someone, they're like, "Oh, you're giving me the time of day. I'm about to take an hour out of your life right now." And sometimes that's really joyful and fun, and other times that doesn't feel like what we have to offer in this moment. So how do you go about thinking about creating and then ultimately communicating where your lines are?
Yeah, I think there are two things that I have work around. One is allowing it to be a process of understanding and self-discovery. Like, I don't have to necessarily know what my boundaries are when I start. I can allow how I feel to inform me. If I give myself space to check in and notice what's going on, I think, again, like, our emotions are such powerful teachers. They're not information about what's happening outside. It's about how you're experiencing what's happening. And so to be able to check in and go, okay, what is this about? What is this feeling about? What is it telling me? What's coming up for me? And sometimes that can tell me about my capacity. Like, if I start to feel frustrated or irritated or like somebody is taking from me, then I can recognize that, okay, what is this about? Because it's not about them, it's about me. And oh, my capacity was too much. There are times where I'm like, I don't feel like peopling. I don't want to people right now. And that tells me, like, I need other support. I do need other care. And sometimes community care can look like somebody watching my kids so that I can go take a walk or something, so I think one of the reasons why we get depleted when it comes to being of service and when it comes to caring for each other is we often, those of us who have people pleasing tendencies, get into situations where we're the ones who are doing all the caring and we're not allowing ourselves to receive
Yes.
care. And that is where I know I personally often struggle. And I work with a lot of people who have people pleasing tendencies. And that one blocks our ability to receive care because it gets tied up with identity. Like, I'm the person who's the strong one who can give care. That's also individualistic. That service isn't it's about bolstering who we believe we are rather than connecting. And the other piece, so it blocks receiving care. The other piece is it blocks setting boundaries because we don't want to upset anybody and we don't want to cause friction and tension and
Right.
discomfort for ourselves by way of making other people uncomfortable. Right? So it's like, if I make you uncomfortable, I make me uncomfortable. People pleasing is very common around people who are feel deeply and have a lot of empathy for other people because that's one of the places where we fill in the gap. I know I feel uncomfortable when this happens, so I'm going to assume that you're going to feel uncomfortable and that you will feel the same way that I feel. And so I will curate myself to protect you. And that creates all kinds of difficulties and disconnection because I'm making assumptions on other people and interacting with them based on those assumptions that then impact me, that then impact them. And so we have this whole relationship that is not being spoken. So, a big part of how I work to address that is to lean into the discomfort of actually communicating and being vulnerable again, being vulnerable enough to say, "Hey, I'm nervous."
Just start by sharing your experience.
Start by sharing the
Yes.
feeling. Yeah. "Hey, I'm really nervous to say this. I care deeply about you and I need to let you know that I need to be more mindful of time when we talk. And I wanna make sure that I give you space, and I know that if I don't talk to you about this, I'm gonna avoid, and I'm not gonna," like, to even it's vulnerable to say it out loud, but, I mean, I did this with my husband when we were early in our relationship, and I was learning how to have relationship I was having a lot of jealousy, and I was having a lot of, like, passive aggressive stuff coming up, and I didn't know how to stop that behavior yet, but I was able to at least say, "Hey, look, you go out with friends. I can't my words are gonna tell you that it's fine. I don't know how to stop this behavior that's gonna tell you it's not fine, but what I want you to know is that I've got stuff and I will be okay even though I'm acting like an ass." you know? And I need you to do what's best for you and trust me to take care of me. and it's going to be fine. And he did what was best for him. And so, like, I couldn't stop being passive aggressive. I didn't know how yet, but I could at least articulate that that was happening for me and give him the space to make the most loving decision for him because I was being
Being
honest.
honest. So skillful, Val. So courageous, honest. Just being able to be honest. This is my experience. I often do that with Mackenzie, with my wife. So like I don't want to feel this way, which is its own resistance actually. So that's something else to work on. But I would prefer not to have this right now. And yet I am. And this is the tool I'm hearing you use that I love coming back to is this yes and, right? That we learn from
Mhm.
improv comedy. And it doesn't mean we have to agree. And one way you were just using it is yes being here's what I'm experiencing and here's a request that I have or what I want to share around that. It can also be just when listening, I hear you saying this. No agree, no disagree. Like this is what I'm hearing. And here is how I'm interpreting that, or this is my experience of that. Because but takes away what we just said. Yeah, I really get what you're saying, Val,
Yeah.
but I really think you should not tell your husband that you feel jealous and just work on it yourself. Like that's not I hear you and
He's
exactly. I
judgy.
hear you and here's what I'm thinking. What's your it just helps lower defenses, right? It makes us
Yeah.
gives a little bit more space to the other person to share their experience as well. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So I'm wondering, final thoughts, like what haven't we touched on yet
Oh, everything.
in this first conversation?
It's so interesting. So, like, it's one thing to talk about all of these things, and we try and give examples,
Right.
so it's not just theoretical. I love analogies for that reason is because it helps make things more tangible and ties to things. Oh, I know this, right? It taps into that brain knowledge of like, oh, that's familiar, so I can grasp onto it. And there's some things completely unfamiliar. You can't like even if it makes logical sense,
It's
it's
got
like
nowhere to live in our brain is one way to
grasping at
think
an
about it.
illusion. Exactly. Yes, I love that. And so, giving examples, giving analogies and things like that, I think is really helpful. And just going back again to what we've been talking about is it's a process. It's a journey of relationship with ourselves. And that is often through our relationship with other people and the things in our life. And so we learn about ourselves through other people and through those relationships. And so it's constantly evolving and unfolding. And it's not really something that you can fully get in a podcast, like listening to and I love books. I love like all the value you can get from podcasts and stories and all of those things. And it's never gonna be the same thing as walking through it and, like, actually doing it, and so, like, while I talk about things on my podcast all the time, I am often frequently surprised and inspired by what comes forward when I'm working with a client. It's one of the things I love about groups and doing group coaching is so often people will come and somebody will share something and the next person who shares goes, I didn't realize that I needed to work on this, but what you just walked through is exactly what I needed to hear." And so often it's a journey, it's a collaboration. And so I think the thing that I want to acknowledge while, if you loved listening to this and you love this podcast and listening and you want to listen to my podcast, those are great things. Finding a space to practice to engage the work, whether it's hiring one of us, whether it's working with a therapist, whether it's connecting with some friends who are doing similar work or wherever that is, that's where the magic happens. That's where the little sparks start to open up into a blaze of glory. Yeah, I would encourage you, like, don't just let it sit in your head. Allow it to be something that you bring into the world and that you practice in some way.
Thank you, Val. Completely agreed. And you can start anywhere. There's no prescription, there's no best way or right way. Just whatever you feel drawn to. Hopefully, we've given enough examples between everything you just listed and courses and the line for meditation that I've loved from teachers is if you want to get to know yourself, sit down and listen. Just be with yourself for a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, it's going to be uncomfortable, but there is no inherent threat that's not already there. And I think the James Baldwin quote is something along the lines of, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so thank you. I just hope we can
absolutely.
lend
Yes,
some
thank
inspiration
you.
to practicing today. I could not agree more. Thanks so much for your time, Val. This has been great. I'm so excited to hopefully get caught up on all your podcast episodes, and thanks for being an early one on mine. It really means a lot.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you inviting me. It's been good to be here.
Take care. Thanks. All right. Well, another big thank you to Val, and thank you to you so much for being here with us for this conversation on the Fresh Perspectives podcast. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, I would be grateful if you'd be willing to take a moment to subscribe, offer any feedback or reviews, and share with a friend if you think they might benefit from listening. Thanks so much for your curiosity. I'm wishing you courage and compassion. Take care.